Thank you very much for this invitation to the university. Today is Rio+20. I believe this is an extremely important happening in the beginning of this millennium. But as we go to Rio+20, I ask myself some questions that bother me. And one of the fundamental questions is whether Rio+20 will have anything new. Whether we are going to see something that is not dominated by the usual economics and finance in the world today, and maybe open to some other possibilities. Whether Rio will dominate or not dominate by the same people, by the same government, by the same groups. Actually, this should be called Rio+40 if we understand that the first conference on environment and development was in 1972 in Stockholm, Sweden. Also, I wonder whether, this conference will have room for new paradigm, for new ideas, and for the capacity to listen to indigenous peoples, for example. I was part of the 1992 conference, and these questions are again and again coming up in my mind. Professionally speaking, I am an outgrowth of these conferences. Actually, I came to the United States to study a PhD in environmental economics because of a response of American universities to the 1972 conference in Sweden, where the Department of Economics, Agriculture, basic science and ecology formed this PhD, and I was very lucky to be one of the first generation that got out of this program. There was a lot of advance in the area of environmental economics between 1972 and the 1980s. For example, in terms of new form of economic thinking, new forms of valuation of the environment. How much does it cost, or what is the value of one tree, of one bird? We did a lot of work in that area for quite some time. And the economics at the time did not have the toolkit. Today, to my dismay, economics as a science has a lot of instruments to do better in environmental economics, but actually a lot is on the shelf and not very much practice. It's important to understand that the issue of sustainable development can be looked at from many different perspectives. One perspective is to look at sustainable development as an outgrowth of economic development or social development, as a sort of a next stage into it. But sustainable development can also be looked in terms of a value system. Many people think that if you really want to understand the nature of sustainable development, you need to question the value system that societies today use in the context of their activities. Sustainable development can also be looked as a lifestyle, a totally different way of living in this planet. So the term sustainable development gives context to very interesting debate and exchanges as to whether, the type of notion of development or progress will lead us to sustainable societies. Also, sustainable development has been understood and debated in terms of a right, the right to clean environment, the right to life, the right to health, the right to water, the right to land, etc., etc. So as a human right, also there is plenty there for those of you who are in the academia to think about sustainable development. Last but not least, sustainable development also is being discussed in terms of our non-material existence in this planet. That is to say, a lot of the debate in the UN and outside the UN and in many NGO organizations is about the spiritual, the non-material nature of living in this planet. And I think this more or less set a little bit the frontier. Actually, I have tried to make a contribution into this area of spirituality and economics, and I've been writing about this topic for the last 30 years. And at the beginning, nobody will actually listen about it, but now there is more and more people understanding that if we don't question our value system, if we do not understand ourselves as human beings as part of an organized order that is beyond our own intelligence, then it will be very difficult to fulfill the objectives of sustainable development. There are many other ways to look into this paradigm. If you look at the Hindu spirituality, one of the key principles of Hindu spirituality is that the outer is like the inner, and the inner is like the outer. So if you really want to organize the outer garden in a particular way, they would say you better start by organizing your inner garden. That is impossible to have a new perspective of life there if you don't have a new perspective of life here. Actually, in my first college tour, when I came to the university here, DePaul University, I talk about spiritual entrepreneurship. And I remember a little bit of consternation as to what Alfredo is going to say about entrepreneurship. And what I said was that there are 3 levels of entrepreneurship. One, business entrepreneurship, which is consciousness of the business as a human being. The second one is social entrepreneurship, which is a consciousness not only about the business, but also consciousness about the social and the environmental, surrounding of the business. But I said that it's impossible to be a good social entrepreneur if you don't know who you are, because your values and your biases will actually say what is outside there. So for many people, social entrepreneurship, it's okay, but maybe for you it's not okay. The destruction of the environment may be too much for you to accept that level of social entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship without the human factor means nothing. And until and unless we find our own self-identity, it's very difficult to be an entrepreneur. I have a son who is an entrepreneur, and I have followed more or less his own cycle of entrepreneurship. The same thing is happening with sustainable development. I also must say that I had the opportunity to be the principal author of the Latin American position to the 1992 conference by the Economic Commission of Latin America. And it was interesting how the politics played in derailing something that was basically to project more the interplay between economics and environment from the macroeconomic point of view. Because I felt that if we do not manage the incentive structure at the macro level in sync and coherently with what we want to do in the environment, it would be very difficult to put them together. So you can have the best ideas at the local level, but if the macroeconomic environment is not conducive for that idea to succeed in the long term, you don't have anything. This experience comes from me seeing myself after the second oil crisis, that the institution I worked for went into the so-called structural adjustment lending, go for macroeconomic policy and not for projects, and I saw many of the little projects and the little actions derailed by this changing in the macroeconomic structure. Today we live in a globalized world with liberal economics or neoliberal economics, free trade, free market, and we know what the outcomes of that type of thinking is, and so macroeconomics plays an important role. I must say that the story of sustainable development, and this is important for Rio, does not begin on sustainable development and doesn't end in sustainable development. And this I wrote about it in the early 2000s when I said that the next step to sustainable development is empowered development, which is consistent with the view I just shared with you of spiritual entrepreneurship and looking at sustainable development from the human factor point of view, from the values point of view, or from the spiritual point of view. That is to say, without empowering people to empower themselves in terms of how they fit in the natural environment, it will be very difficult to see long-term sustainability or to reach what I would like to see, a sustainable civilization. In my profession, actually I went through a cycle of 3 steps. One step was the environmental phenomena. I had to study it. I was one of the beginning, the first pioneers, so we didn't have the data. We had to collect the data. We had to do the fundamental research before we were able to talk to other economists about evaluating the environment. That didn't go for many years, but I wasn't very satisfied with the results. And there are books that you might look at the Google that we wrote about it. Then I went to a second phase, which is the phase of putting actually an individual or putting a name to pollution. Not only pollution, but who pollutes. And this was a very short part of my career because it was politically incorrect. You know, the moment you say, you know, this friend here is the one who pollutes more in the university, he will find all the legal and all the norms to really get me out of the system, you know. And so that part of my career was very short. And then I move into what interests me now, which is not only pollution or who pollutes, but why human beings pollute. What makes us to turn the window of the car down and throw the last piece of your cigarette to the road, or some plastic bag, you know? Why we are doing this? Because if we are able to more or less look into this phenomenon, then we will be able to really look at the causes and conditions and not just look at the final symptom. I believe that until and unless we move Rio+20 now into these areas, into this frontier, Rio will be more of the same. And I think we cannot afford, given the world crisis, to have a Rio conference that is more of the same. I must say that the frontier today lies on two fundamental questions. One is our notion of planet Earth, whether this is an entity outside us, whether this is an entity that has lower intelligence, and I will talk a little bit about that, or is something else. What is this experience on this planet? And secondly, on human identity and human behavior with the environment. I think Rio+20 will be a missed opportunity if we don't push the countries and the social organizations and the communities to move toward this frontier. A few years ago, I was in Paris for the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the question that I posed to the people was whether 60 years was enough, you know, to see human rights being implemented. And some people will say, no, we need to wait longer for women to really have equal rights, that this is a process. We need to be longer for nature to have rights, and so on and so forth. So the question to me today is whether this conference, after 40 years, you know, have we done enough, or should we go back to the basic things again? Now to the conference itself and my commentaries on what I am seeing right now, and then I will give some suggestion for future action as I see it. So that's more or less my plan. The conference is being organized under two headings, basically. Of all the topics that they had in hand, they selected two. One is the institutional framework for sustainable development. And here we have two elements that I will dig in 1 minute. And the second major topic is greening the economy within the context, this is very important, within the context of sustainable development and poverty alleviation. This title, please remember, because if you go to the Google, you will find how narrow this has been defined, and so we will see how little we will end up having if this continues to go into this direction. So if you will allow me, the first part now will be on institutional framework for sustainable development. As finished that, I will go into greening the economy within the context of sustainable development and poverty alleviation. And then I will end offering you how we should be doing and guiding this process and the importance for you to be involved. Is that okay? So we'll go in that direction. Essentially, the proposal that has been floating in the institutional side of things contains two major areas. One area is what are the institutional issues that the United Nations and the governments in the United Nations see as important. And the second one is a very interesting one for you who are young, here in the room particularly, is they are floating an idea of a new world organization, a new world environmental organization. And I will refer to those two issues. So first, on institutions. The key problem of this conference, as far as I see it right now, is the very limited definition of what the word institution means. Essentially, if you look at the website, most of the debate today is on the United Nations and whether the United Nations will be capable of handling the environmental problems of the world. I find that very important. I am very interested, and many of you here know that I spend a lot of time debating the role of the UN and or the lack thereof, and the importance to change the UN so it responds better to this objective of a sustainable society. So I am not diminishing the importance of having this as an objective of the conference. ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. So there's a lot about that. But unfortunately, the word institution must mean much more than that. And having been a student of institutional economics, because that was the basic foundation of the PhD, the first baby step that they take you in environmental, in institutional economic 101 is to understand that organizations are only one part of a long list of the importance of institutions. For example, in the word institution, incentive structures are part of it. Market-oriented instruments are part of it. What I mean by market-oriented instruments: prices, taxes, subsidies, quotas, and so on. For example, the polluter pays principle is part of the debate on the institutional arrangement for sustainable development. You also find in there the laws, the rules, the regulations, the norms. You find many, many other elements that constitute, this concept of institution. But let's look at it from an organizational point of view. Just let's do that. If the response to the environmental issues of the world will be an organizational response, I can tell you right now, it will fail flat. In other words, a perfectly organized United Nations is not sufficient to bring the world to a sustainable level. Unfortunately, we always, have this this organizational response. There is a problem in the university, we create a new department. There is a problem in the city, we create a new commission. But that's not sufficient. So what is happening is that we, even with the best of intention, you can have globally, organizationally wise, something that is good, but if you don't have organizational response at the local level, then you also find incoherence. It's impossible to reach sustainable development without acting locally. So if you even look at the organizational issue alone, you need to look at a huge long string of layers of organization for which nothing I have heard of yet in the pre-conference debate. If the United Nations will be the core of the debate, so only at that level, I think we need to ask, why did we get where we are now? I think that we need to be transparent why the system is not working. Secondly, we need to have a yardstick that should be sufficiently clear as to how we will reorganize the UN, because for us who have been in the UN, we have seen many reorganizations of the UN, so mostly every Secretary General brings a reorganization. But how do you reorganize the United Nations to be in line with sustainable development? To me, that is a very interesting debate. Also, I think we need to think about how to rein in the international financial institution, whether it is possible to just reorganize the UN for sustainable development and not reorganize the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization in line with sustainable development. I don't know how this could be done. It's like having a forestry problem and creating a Ministry of Forestry, but no incentive structures to protect the forest. So you can have a fantastic layout for the vision that the United Nations gives, but the incentive structures by development institutions might go counter that organization, so you get nowhere. So, what we need to understand is that if you are going to talk about organizational arrangement at the local level, you must understand organizations as people. Organizations are not buildings, are not rules. It's people behind this organization. So how do we get the human factor into this reorganization? It's unclear to me, because government are not the only human organization. There are many other organizations that have not even say into what's happening at this point in time. I have tried to contribute to this process for many years. I wrote a book on soil conservation and land management, institutional economics and policy, with Andrew Dragoon, who is chairman of the Resource Economic Department in New Zealand, in one of the universities in New Zealand. And we spread it out. What is the content of this term institution? Also, when I was in the Operations Evaluation Department, I found out from fundamental research on 2,000 projects, not one project, that the institutional capital was an essential ingredient for the success of this project, and I learned more about the complexity of this institution. So I found many forms of capital, not only physical capital, not only financial capital, not only human capital, but I found natural capital, institutional capital, cultural capital, and spiritual capital as being fundamental in keeping into the way to sustainable development. And actually I did a research on like 200 case studies done by the countries, not by the World Bank, on poverty, and using mathematical and operational control theory, I found out that the fundamental form of capital keeping people poor was the weak institutional capital of these countries. And within this capital, we open it up, including human rights and laws and all of this. We found out that a principal component analysis of the data showed that human right was essential in the determination of people's poverty. In other words, the research would say that most people are poor because they don't have the ability, or the system doesn't enable them to fulfill their human rights. So if they have rights to land and rights to water and so on, people might come out of this, which is the research done in Peru, as we discussed this morning. So I tried to contribute to this. Also, I tried to contribute in changing the definition of sustainable development. One way was to accept this triangle definition that sustainability means economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. I changed those triangles and I presented a paper at the 10th World Forest Congress saying that the true triangle is human capital at the top, institutional capital, and natural capital. That was actually the interaction that we should look at. In other words, the human being, the incentive structure, and nature. What's interesting enough that in 1987, I wanted to use the term natural capital in one of my findings, and I was forbidden to use it. This is 1987, this is not 1805. And I had to go up to the level of the president to get approval for the use of the term, because many economists will say this term doesn't exist. Tell me, what do you mean by human capital? Natural capital, sorry. Well, what do you mean by that? What is it? Now, a lot has been traveled in institutional aspects of sustainable development. And I am afraid that there is no way to catalyze these findings. There's no way in the system today that one will group this and say, look, this is where we are 40 years later. I'll give you some landmark. If people are interested in this, I will send the paper to Pat and to Mark, because I've written an extensive paper on this, looking at the history of environmental economics and how it contributed to this debate. For example, the ecological movement. The ecological movement was crucial to identify the term institution in a different way. For example, what constitutes an environmental issue? What constitutes an ecological issue? How weak the government structures were, they identified. How weak the process of public choices were in the countries where you saw major environmental problems. So the ecological movement was extremely instrumental in giving us, this. The other thing that the ecological movement brought to us in terms of this debate on institutional arrangement was that people working on environmental management or sustainable development or ecology is that you had to work out at the same time into spatial problems as well as intertemporal problems. And they found out that there were no organizational arrangement or institutional arrangement that will defeat the outcome of the market so that we do not create negative external effect, spatially or intertemporal. I'll give you an example because it might not be a language that everyone understands. Spatially, I mean you have a river basin, there is a factory on the upstream, they pollute the river, and then you need to drink the water, so you need to create a plant, to clean this water, otherwise you cannot drink it. This is a spatial negative effect. The problem there is that there is an asymmetric incidence. The guy who creates the pollution problem upstream doesn't pay for the water. We pay it in our water bill. So the institutional arrangement, the way it exists now is not conducive to a stop at the source. So then economists invented many things like polluter pay principles, so the corporation to pay, or subsidize for new technology, so this company will not pollute the water in the first place, and so on and so forth. So this is a spatial issue. There are no organizational arrangements really that are good enough to get it. Now, the intertemporal one has to do with the fact that when we talk about sustainable development, we are not talking only about the present generation, but also future generation. So are there institutional arrangements conducive to behave in a way now so that we not destroy the earth for future generations? Mrs. Brundtland, you know, in the commission that she brought up in 1987, Our Common Future, she defined sustainable development as that style of development that is able to satisfy the needs of present generation without sacrificing the ability of future generation to satisfy their own needs. Very interesting definition, with a lot of pro and a lot of con. I will not get into that because of time, but it's important to look at this, and the ecological movement did bring about a lot in this respect. Another group that brought a lot about institutions and sustainable development was the Water Resources Council of the United States. I take my hat to it, and actually the whole PhD was around what the Water Resources Council of the United States has brought for many, many, many years. You know, for example, on issues of valuation. The market values the tree as its value on furniture. We value the tree on its freestanding value as an ecological or aesthetic or beauty or whatever. Some people value it spiritually because the genes of an oak tree of 3,000 years of age, you know, might have an incredible importance in our life, and not exchange this 3,000-year-old tree by a 2 weeks old, you know, apple tree. There's something there that doesn't fit, but the market is blind. The market doesn't have that capacity. The Water Resources Council made tremendous contribution on guidelines on valuation, benefit cost analysis for those who are more analytically inclined. So if you want to know more about institutions, actually you should look at the Water Resources Council. Between 1972 and 1981-82, which was the era that I was particularly involved, sectoral policies came up, you know, and they were dissolved and sort of disintegrated because of the structural adjustment and the energy crisis. For example, if you look at the 1978 policy paper on forestry by the World Bank, you would not believe that that paper was written at the World Bank. How environmental it was. I was part of the drafting, and also part of the drafting of the fisheries policy paper, on the renewable energy in agriculture. We had a lot of paper, but all of a sudden, all this advancement disappeared. So, for many people who are here in the room and want to know about institution at the sectoral level, there is plenty that was left behind that you might pick up and do a good paper or a good dissertation on how to move this forward. There was a fantastic article that all of you have to read. I have never written an article of this type of impact, and I don't think I have probably the caliber to write it. This was the tragedy of the commons. This was a 7-page article, 1968, Science magazine. Garrett Hardin, he revolutionized the debate on sustainable development. And he shows there this new definition of institution, which goes beyond organization. And he explained how the tragedy of the commons occurred. There is a pasture land lacking of an institutional arrangement called property rights. So he is a herdsman. I am a herdsman. We had the same number of sheep. And then the question he asked, is there enough incentive for any of both of us to stop sending an additional sheep into the prairie? There is none, because if he doesn't, I will. So what he described is that there are so many sheep on the prairie that end up eating all the grass and destroying the prairie. So he said, we are more or less at the point of the tragedy of the commons. And I think people should read this and see what the solution to resolve this tragedy of the commons, which I don't agree with, but he said the best way institutionally to stop the tragedy of the common is to privatize the prairie. In other words, to create exclusion by property rights, so this is my land and this is your land, and you deal with that. We have seen the privatization of many of these tremendously important goods, and in the end, they don't work because the private sector has a different objective and a different set of incentives to go ahead. I will not belabor much on this except to make one conclusion, that if the Rio conference does not expand its definition of the term institution, I don't think it's very much worthwhile to have a conference about the UN. I think they can have it in the UN, but not to make a worldwide organization of that. I will go to the second point on institution, which is basically the World Environmental Organization. Let me say the following, that there are many proposals floating on this, with many different interesting ideas, but never in this conference has an organizational arrangement of this nature been approved. And I wonder whether this next conference has enough political traction, for the government to say, yes, we are going to create a world environmental organization that is not a United Nations environmental program, it's beyond that. So in this short presentation, I want to tell you what the condition would be, because I am in favor of a new world environmental organization, because the objective of a sustainable society needs to see the light of the day, institutionally and organizationally. Otherwise, we will continue discussing this in this type of environment, in this type of setting, but we will not get very far. So I am in favor of it, but it seems to me that if this World Environmental Organization will only be about governments, then I don't want it. We know what the outcome it is. This must be an open organization. This must be an organization set as an assembly where everyone can have a voice and a vote. And I think technology today allows to have decision-making through assemblies, in ways that are organized and coherent. And we need to make sure that this is not again the imposition of government, is not again just the economic criterion to determine what is going to be. But very important, my view is that a World Environmental Organization should be par with the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Trade Organization and the UN. In other words, the international community needs to reflect what people say around the world, that the environment matters. But if the environment truly matters, as much or more than just money, then we need to have an organization of the stature and the tenor to be in balance, par with those who hold the money. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to accept as an organization. And I would say that it is possible to have in the world the peaceful protection of this planet. This is one of my main ideals in life now, to go for this, and actually I'm trying to make a specific proposal on how to really get to this peaceful protection of the planet, because we can create organizations that create too much conflict and they begin to disappear or they begin to be diminished. We have to be peacefully protecting this planet and not in conflict protecting this planet. Unfortunately, the view of the past has been always that environment is conflicting, environment is something that creates conflict. I remember when I tried to say, I am an environmental economist trying to find a job, and said, no, we don't want to really get into trouble, you come to fiscalize us, you have to control us, this is not good enough. So they always saw the ecological movement as a conflicting movement, and this needs to change. So I am for a world environmental organization, but an organization that has to be par with other international organizations, has to be a people's organization, and there is possibility to do that through assemblies. It has to have a legislature that brings coherent outcomes, but this is something that needs to be worked out. Let me move now into greening the economy. This is even more complex, because greening the economy is not a new topic, it's a very old topic. But if you look at what is being said and what papers, background papers that have been written on greening the economy, we are bringing the debate to things that were discussed 20, 50 years ago that never had a solution, like, for example, a discussion on the discount rate. We are not going to solve that discussion. What is the value of capital? It's very difficult because it's very subjective, and there is no way we are going to go back again to discuss, what is the value of the discount rate. But it's important to understand that greening the economy requires to go beyond economics. I don't think if you look at the economy from that perspective, it's going to resolve the greening of the economy. And to green the economy, and this is not a joke, I think we need to start greening economists. And we need to green economic organizations, which are people organizations. And I say this very seriously because I spent many years of my life convincing economists that greening was important, and it's not that easy to convince them. We have to avoid fallacies. One of the fallacies is grow now, clean later. Or what is good for the economy is good for the environment. And remember that the title of this section is not only greening the economy, but within the context of sustainable development and poverty alleviation. So there is another fallacy. What is good for the economy is good for poverty alleviation. So grow first and then distribute. I don't believe in that particular fallacy. I think he has demonstrated wrong. And I think now some economists are saying, very famous economists like Amartya Sen and many people are saying that the economy will have sustainable growth. I'm talking about pure growth if the original conditions are more equitable rather than being unequitable. In other words, it's not necessary for sustainable growth to end up with Gini coefficients of income distribution that are terrible. So I'm saying again and again and again for many years that we not need to create inequities to be able to reach sustainable development, that we don't need to destroy the environment to have higher rates of growth. We need to bring sustainable development as an objective function of the exercise and not as a constraint. And this is something that is not going to happen from one day to another. I believe that there are ways to green the economy, and there is a lot of literature about greening the economy. And there is a lot of literature about poverty alleviation, but they are separate literature. There is not much literature that tells us how to green the economy and attain sustainable development and poverty alleviation at the same time. And this implies, that some fundamental changes need to happen. One of them is that we are not going to reach this type of programmatic stand if we let the market continue to have the power that it has now. It's impossible. This is a matter of empiricism. It's not a matter of ideology. I'm not here ideologically attacking the market as a way to deal with it, but the market is one institution of exchange and not the whole set of institutional arrangements that are needed for a sustainable society. The market is blind. The market doesn't see over space and over time, so this is very important. Also, the market sees its value system, this value formation system, as a response to needs and not necessarily in response to sustainability. So to leave the market and think on a little corner of the market here and there and just put the tax here and the tax there, without moving society to a higher level of collective consciousness, the market doesn't work. The reason why the capitalist system is failing today, and there is a crisis in the world, I don't think I need to announce this here, everyone is following it, is because for a capitalist system to work well, it needs a very high level of collective consciousness. It's not possible to have a capitalist system, with very low levels of understanding of how nature works, human interaction works, and so on. So the outcomes are very minimal. So I would say that it's important for us to green the economy and be very pragmatic, and I don't want just to leave this as a general proposition. One group of people are saying one way to deal with this is to go from a single bottom line to a double bottom line, from just pure economics to economic and social. Then it came the triple bottom line, to have economic, social, and environmental. None of this worked because actually there is no economic framework that resolves the issue, because they are intransitive. The fact that something is good for economic doesn't mean it's good for social, or something that is good for economic and social is not necessarily good for environment. Second, because these words, economic, social, and environment, they're huge aggregates. It's very difficult to separate social capital, for example. social capital contains human capital, institutional capital, cultural capital, spiritual capital. How do you really work with such an aggregation? So I was one of the people who originated this framework and realized in the end that it was impossible to work with this framework. So people went into research on the social side, other ones again to the environmental side, and then no dialogue, you know, again, very difficult to put together. Think only about the problems that have not been resolved by creating an environmental impact statement, an environmental, you know, and a social impact statement. You know, they were good ideas, but never stopped some projects, you know, that had major social or environmental impact, although they did good in many places. And last but not least is that if this greening the economy is not coherent with macroeconomic policy, policy on labor, on trade, on consumption, on foreign exchange, on fiscal policy in particular, then nothing is going to happen. You cannot green the economy by having little projects of here and there and there. The scale of the problem is so large that even if these projects are successful, they might not be successful enough, you know, to change the world pattern of global warming, ozone layer depletion, and so on and so forth. One more project is not going to do it. So I believe that if Rio+20 is going to have any success, or is going to propose anything new, will be actually to bring the debate on greening the economy to the title that they themselves chose, which is within the context of sustainable development and poverty alleviation. And my proposal today is that we go to this vortex, you know, this corner where sustainable development, poverty alleviation, and, you know, sustainable and economic greening the economy go together. Is there a way to do this together? And I say yes, there is a way. And for this, I will not go into the theory, I will go right to the proposal in terms of practice. There have to be 7 or 8 programs that the United Nations need to embrace, because these programs are exactly at the point of greening, sustainability, and poverty alleviation. One of them is the program with indigenous peoples. I think if the United Nations elevates its program with indigenous people, I think we will do everything that we will green the economy, we'll deal with poverty alleviation, and we'll deal with sustainability. Most indigenous nations are located at the frontier of these ecological settings, you know, and I think they are poor, so we will be contributing to poverty alleviation, and also we will be contributing to greening the economy. The second program that I'm suggesting is how to green shanty towns. I think it will be fantastic if we go to Brazil or Chile or India and we create gardens in shanty towns. We make this ecology of shanty town different, and this will have a huge impact not only on poverty and greening, you know, and sustainability, but also on health, education, and human welfare in general. The third program that I think, you know, Rio+20 should take care of is about artisanal fisheries development. You know, most of the monies are going to industrial fisheries, and we know how they are destroying, you know, the fisheries of the world. But if you go to the artisanal fisheries sector, you will find that now there is sufficient technology to have certification of origin, so they comply with environmental guidelines, as well as integrating them into the bluing, because it's more blue than green, but integrate them into sustainability and raise their standard of living. The other program that I think needs to be discussed is community forestry and social forestry. I think there are excellent examples of success in this area. Go to the literature of Ford Foundation in the 60s and 70s, go to the World Bank literature on the 70s and 80s about the social forestry. We know how to do it, we should do more about it. And these people who live in forests, they're very poor people, so you can do the 3 objectives together. The next program that needs to be discussed in Rio+20 is smallholder agriculture. We have forgotten about smallholder agriculture. We are not doing much with the small is beautiful. You know, this was the 70s by Schumacher. Small is beautiful. That actually the productivity of small farms is super important for agriculture as well as for food security. And I think we need new ways of doing mini farm development, because now there is sufficiently good technology, you know, to do it that we didn't have in the 60s and the 70s. And I think the time is to do it. Then the next program that I'm proposing in my website, actually, is Trees for Peace. You know, how to plant trees in a way that you bring peace to the planet. This is very important for the three objectives of greening, sustainable development, and poverty alleviation. We are doing this in my foundation, and we are having a tremendous success. And what we are saying to the people, just plant as many trees as family members you have. Don't plant it. If you want to do more, do it. So if you have a family of 4, plant 4 trees. What trees? Whatever trees you want. You know, if the fruit trees that you like, do fruit trees. If you want to have forest, well, you're not going to have a lot, but some have actually with 5 or 6, you know, long-term growing varieties. They might have some. I see it around my farm. I live in a farm, by the way, and so these programs are not just, you know, a speculation from my part. And I challenge the UN that we should have at least, you know, 10 million trees being planted before the conference. That people should do this. The NGO community should be involved in doing this, so to prove that they have the power to change society to a sustainable development. If we are not able to organize ourselves for a program like Trees for Peace, then we are not going to be organized on any ground. This program is so simple. You know, we are planting trees, for example, in primary schools. So when the kid comes for kindergarten, he or she plants his own tree, and then they protect it all their life. You know, so we have many of these programs in Venezuela and in Colombia. The other program we have is called Greens for Peace. These are programs that we have now proven that work, which is 1 square meter of vegetable gardens. With a special way of doing the vegetable garden, they can sustain a family of 4 very easily. They are almost costless. You know, we have the expertise to do it, and it's mushrooming in Guatemala, in Bolivia, in Colombia, in Venezuela, the countries that I know, and I'm sure there are many other countries where this is happening. And here, women are of particular importance because they are essentially the caretakers, the nurturing angle of a family. So they are very involved and they're very interested. We are also spreading this Greens for Peace in areas where indigenous people live, because this resolves much of the poverty problem. We are also proposing Bees for Peace. You know, the bees are our bird, the canary in the mine, you know, and they are dying. So something is happening to the environment that the bees are disappearing. The second importance of the bees is that the bees increase the productivity of these green programs, you know, very fast, particularly those programs that the greens have flowers, like fruit trees and vegetable gardens. The other thing that I've seen on this is that this program improved the level of engagement of women in agriculture, because they are really interested. I have done an experiment in my farm, giving away, you know, these bee families that they are very expensive, by the way, in some areas, not just to buy. But once they have it, in no time at all, they can go from 10 families to 20 families to 60 families. Last year, only 3 months having these families, there are 17 families of bees, they got 60 kilos of honey. And it's not an insignificant amount if you know what the price of honey is. You know, just buy honey here in the United States, it's quite expensive. Let me end my presentation by saying that it is up to us, people, citizens of the world, to see that Rio+20 succeeds. Let's not go out of this room and say, okay, very nice, good, I go to my office or my job, and let Rio, no, call your congressman, ask them to really get involved in a new way of handling sustainability in the world. Otherwise, unfortunately, we will see our planet decay in such a way that the historians will tell about us as being sitting down there doing nothing and let the system collapse. We need to get the bloodstream going. You are a student, you are faculty, you are a citizen of the world. You need to really get involved in Rio+20. And There are programs, I just listed some of them, but there are 3 or 4 elements that are key conditions for what is going to happen in Rio, assuming that Rio is action. If Rio is not action, then there are many other things anyway. The first and foremost is a new vision of our planet, a new vision of nature. Nature is not an inert thing, the earth is a live thing. We are part of the earth. We are not over and above the earth. If you think that you are more intelligent than the earth, don't drink carrot juice. Because if you drink lower intelligence, you will be ending up being with lower intelligence. This is a law. I mean, if I just eat things that are lower intelligence, our cell at the ultra primordial level will begin to be dominated by lower level intelligence. And we know it is not. You are tired, you drink a good juice, your body expands. You have good diet, your body progresses. So it's not about unequal intelligence as many people see it. Secondly, we are not the dominators of this. We cannot dominate anything. We are part of a huge system that is organized. So the vision about our planet needs to change, but needs to be self-realized as a vision. It's not just a vision. You need to feel it in your bones. Otherwise, it looks like an esoteric statement. It's not esoteric. I am a Maya priest for the last 20 years, and we are taught to talk to trees. Trees do talk, whether you know the language or not. This is you need to learn. But nature talks. Nature is alive. You are alive because nature is alive. It's not the other way around. Nature can go and green itself. It doesn't need us to green itself. It's going to go its own ways. The second thing that is important after the vision is to really make an analysis of our way of thinking about sustainable development. What is our intent? How do we think about sustainable development? And here the university has to play a key, pivotal role. Otherwise, who is going to do it? Universities are for that. You need to be open. You need to put any proposal on the table and not be shy, because someone will shoot down your proposal. Intent, the right intent is crucial. The third is the right language. It seems to me that we have a very convoluted language about sustainable development. Maybe it's intentionally so. Maybe people want to have this language that in the end nobody can grab, nobody can have an actionable thing. Maybe that's purposely done that way. But there is no time to change the world. We are here to change the world, and there is no time. So how long are you going to wait for changing this vision of yourself? The third important point before I end is that you need to change yourself to be able to change the world. It is not possible to change the world as an external thing. It's not possible. If you are not in the path of changing yourself, it will be very difficult to change the world. You need to self-realize interdependence. Interdependence is the word. If you don't self-realize interdependence, that we are interdependent human beings with other human beings, that we are interdependent with other forms of life, that we are interdependent with other missions, with our spirit, what the Hindus and the Buddhists call dharma, your obligation in life, your contract. You didn't parachute in this planet. You came here to do something in this planet. If you don't do that dharma, that contract, and you understand that your contract is interactive with my contract, so I am interested in your survival, in your welfare, as well as the welfare of nature, then we are going into a very, very obscure path for humanity. And this is not a sort of a gloomy ending. Why? Because I believe that if we go inside us, the solutions will come, and we don't need really to be a techie fix where we wait until a new technology will come. I don't know how to create new elephants. I cannot be like Genie, that will blink the eyes and I don't know how to create new tigers. For example, there are only 2,000 tigers, Bengal tigers left. There are only, 100,000 elephants left. There are very few orangutan families left. So we need to come to be more humble and understand that if we do not self-realize, collective values, not just individualistic values, materialistic values, but the values of interdependence, solidarity, equity, justice, love, compassion for ourselves as a community of collective and to the planet, the contribution that will be done by Rio+20, it's irrelevant. Let's make Rio+20 relevant, and I'm asking you to join me and others, because I'm not the only one that is a voice in this wilderness. There are many, many, that we get together and make possible that we go to Rio+20 with something new that will add value, but not only in terms of academic value, but in terms of life value. With the same force we created a system that is destroying the planet, we should have more force to create a system that takes care of the planet. Thank you very much.